actually sort of showing live scenarios.
Reach Out Central. Yeah.
Could we talk about how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So probably about 4 or 5 years ago now, the Inspire Foundation and the team at reachout.com developed what was called a serious game. And serious games are games that are designed specifically to have positive educational or health outcomes. They developed up a serious game which was based on cognitive behavioural therapy, which we know is a really, I guess, valid and evidence-based way of being able to manage a lot of mental health difficulties. And they actually took some of that content based on cognitive behavioural therapy or theory to develop up a game where the scenario is that a young person lives in a town. They're new to the town and they need to meet new people and negotiate a number of different challenges that young people often face in their day-to-day experience. So it's a really fantastic resource for young people themselves, but also for people that are working to support young people to navigate different scenarios. So it's about developing problem-solving skills and coping skills and really life skills, you know, ways of being able to navigate new situations and situations that people might find challenging. Yeah, yeah, you do. Yeah. Yeah, but all you need to do to register is provide a valid email address. So a Gmail account or similar to work. And it's Flash-based, so you occasionally need to download the software, but apart from that, it's pretty snazzy. Yeah.
You mentioned in part of the statistics that the rate of suicide among young people dropped. Was there any suggestion that the internet played a factor in that?
Oh, I don't think we could claim that there was a causal relationship between increase of access to the internet and a decline. But what it does mean is that what we've really seen in Australia over the last 10 years, since 1998, which is when suicide in Australia hit its peak, we have really started to see a concerted effort from a lot of parties, including organisations like Headspace, like Beyond Blue and reachout.com, towards actually providing information, referrals and support. So it's very, very difficult to draw a causal relationship between the two. But, you know, what we did see from about 1998 onwards was the advent of Beyond Blue. So Beyond Blue actually kicked off in 2000. We had reachout.com launch in end of 1997, so right when suicide rates were at its peak. Headspace launched in 2006. So again, in that sort of time frame, so you've seen a real shift in the way in which mental health services and mental health care are delivered, but also a whole bunch of activities around increasing mental health literacy, which is why we sort of feel that we need to continue in that direction to provide information and early intervention.
There's also been the introduction of the Mindframe guidelines, which provide, based on fairly solid evidence, provide advice and information to the media about the most appropriate and safe ways to report on suicide and mental illness, and that's been fairly effective, I believe. Yeah,
so in terms of sort of reducing some of the risks of contagion and copycat and those sorts of things. So you've seen a whole bunch of initiatives over a whole range of different entities to address that, which is why we sort of feel that collaborative research and practice is the way to go. We've got to work together on this. Yeah. Or you can speak to the microphone, whatever you like.
No, at my daughter's school, they had someone come from CyberSmart to speak. I found that quite interesting, but just to get your point of view on how many people, generally speaking, young people, do know how to protect themselves properly on the internet, because it's amazing with Facebook how a lot of people have opened themselves because they don't know, never been shown how to.
It's really interesting. In our experience running focus groups with young people around these issues, young people talked at length about the strategies that they had in place. I think oftentimes it's actually about young people's perception of what's risky and what's not. And I guess the nature of the information that they share. So what their parents might perceive to be risky information, they don't necessarily see as risky themselves. But young people were really clear in some of the focus groups that we ran that, they didn't share information about the school that they went to, for example. Or their mobile phone number was kept just to a group of people that they knew and engaged with. People had sort of different privacy settings based on different groups of people. So oftentimes they had kind of a group of really close friends that they had given all access to, and then they had a broader network of people that they were friends with online in an online sense that they didn't necessarily share all of their information with. So it's certainly not as... I think young people are actually a lot more savvy than we give them credit for around their engagement online. That's certainly been our experience anyway. Interestingly though, we often find that there are older people in the community that aren't quite as savvy, possibly because they haven't had the same experiences around setting privacy settings or those sorts of things. And so, there's probably a need there to actually create some really positive dialogue between the generations around the use of some of these social media sites and, the types of information you can share and the types you can't. I often think it's quite interesting. My mum will frequently ring me and go, just checking, is this a scam? It's those sorts of things that young people often will kind of look at it and go, yeah, that's totally a scam. Whereas people that are a little bit older in the community that aren't quite as used to that can often say, oh, but it seemed legitimate. It said it was from the tax office. So those sorts of issues, I think, can still be a challenge.
Quite scary, some of the information, like when they talk about digital footprints and
yeah.
what people don't realise that they're putting up as photos or
yeah.
who might be there for.
But I think that's the thing that I find really fascinating, that I think the world is fundamentally changing, and that I think people over 30, 35 really have this view of privacy and personal and public, and I think young people simply don't have that perspective. They've grown up in a world in which everything's public, and they accept that and understand that, and it's just about mitigating risk. And I think that's inevitably the way that we will move forward, I think. And it's just about the way that we manage that. But I think this traditional view of, within my house and within my home, everything is private and, everything outside is public, I think is decreasingly going to become the common held view, in my perspective.
And I think as you sort of see what we call digital citizenship education. So in the same way that you had civic education when you were at school, it was about learning how to vote, how to participate as a citizen in your community, how to speak up at local council. What we're actually seeing is young people from primary school really being given the opportunity to develop skills in being a digital citizen. And I think as those sorts of programs are rolled out with the focus off the safety and risk and more about how do you actually participate confidently and safely online, I think you'll start to see, I guess, some of those experiences of young people reflected in policies and practice. Yeah. Any other questions, or do we want to throw it open to our panel to make some comments?
I'm sure the panel will have something interesting to say, so...
Will we just?
Maybe Bronnie and Hugh can...
You go first.
Okay. I think I'd first of all start off by saying I think we should be very careful about banding around the idea of young people don't care about privacy. I think instead there's been a significant contextual shift around what they consider privacy to be and what parts of privacy are significant. In that now I see privacy as being much more of a nucleated concept to young people, more so than binary. So they might say that certain pieces of information will be private when you consider that to their parents compared to their friends, whereas in the past you haven't really been able to delineate that relationship as easily. And so one of the things that social networking sites and the internet in general allows is for you to actually control that to a fair extent. And that's the thing I think we should remember, is that one of the advantages of participating in the space is that you actually have an ability to control the information that's out there. And whether that's even at the very least viewing the information that's there about you, viewing the photos that are up on Facebook that you're in, it's better to see them and know that they're there than not see them at all, and sort of take that, oh, well, it'll all sort itself out and I won't see anything. Because unfortunately, the internet's here to stay. And I think we should just be very careful about sort of that whole thing around young people and privacy and how it's different and everything else. In that I still think there's a very strong attitude towards the importance of privacy and self-ownership of identity. But it's just sort of, again, very different context.
See, take home message: context, context, context.